Special Agent Sarah Williams remains perfectly calm as Captain Richardson accuses her of terrorism surveillance on Flight 747. She is simply sitting in first class, reviewing classified documents for congressional testimony, when the veteran pilot decides she poses a security threat. When Richardson destroys her identification in front of shocked passengers, his smug satisfaction seems absolute. But when Sarah slowly unbuttons her blazer and reveals the FBI badge gleaming beneath, the cabin falls into stunned silence. The man who tries to humiliate her is about to learn what real authority looks like. "Mom, I need you to step away from that window immediately." The voice cuts through the cabin's ambient noise like a blade, sharp with authority and dripping with suspicion. Sarah Williams looks up from her case file to find Captain Marcus Richardson standing in the aisle beside her seat, his weathered face set in an expression of barely concealed hostility. His pilot's cap casts shadows across his features, making his eyes appear darker, more menacing. Sarah glances toward the window beside her seat, confused. She hasn't moved toward it in the past hour, focused entirely on reviewing cybersecurity legislation for tomorrow's congressional hearing. "I'm sorry, Captain. I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't play dumb with me," Richardson snaps, his voice loud enough to draw stares from nearby passengers. "I've been watching you from the cockpit door for the past 20 minutes, taking pictures of our instrumentation, making detailed notes about our flight operations, studying our cabin layout like you're planning something." The accusation hits the cabin like a physical blow. Sarah's composure doesn't crack, but something flickers in her dark eyes. Not anger, but a weary recognition of familiar territory. She's been an FBI agent for 5 years, interrogated armed suspects, testified before hostile congressional committees, and maintained her composure while infiltrating criminal organizations. Her supervisor often jokes that Sarah could keep her cool during an earthquake, a trait developed during her childhood in Chicago's South Side, where her father, a decorated Army sergeant, taught her that emotional control could mean the difference between life and death. But nothing in her training prepared her for being accused of terrorism while reviewing case files on a commercial flight. "Captain Richardson," she says quietly, reading his name tag with the careful attention to detail that has made her an effective investigator. "I haven't taken any photographs. I've been reading legal documents for a congressional hearing." Captain Richardson emerges from the cockpit during the flight's cruise phase, a practice that has become his personal ritual for surveying what he considers his domain. His thick fingers adjust his captain's hat as his eyes scan the first-class cabin with the practiced assessment of someone looking for problems to solve, or, more accurately, people to intimidate. At 54 years old, Richardson has grown comfortable with the automatic respect his uniform commands, the way passengers defer to his authority and flight attendants hurry to fulfill his requests. He enjoys these walks through the cabin, these moments when he can remind everyone aboard exactly who controls their fate at 35,000 feet. When his weathered gaze lands on Sarah, something shifts in his expression like a predator spotting prey. He takes in her professional attire, her organized workspace, the expensive briefcase at her feet, and something about the scene triggers a reaction that has become automatic over years of unchecked prejudice. His jaw tightens almost imperceptibly, and he approaches her row with deliberate steps that seem designed to intimidate, his pilot's cap casting shadows across his face that make his expression appear even more menacing. "Excuse me, miss," Richardson says, his tone immediately confrontational in a way that makes nearby passengers look up from their devices. The words carry an undertone of disbelief, as if he cannot fathom how she came to be sitting in seat 2A. "Are you certain you're in the correct seat?" His question hangs in the air like an accusation, drawing the attention of passengers in nearby rows, who begin to sense that something uncomfortable is unfolding. Sarah looks up from her files slowly, her dark eyes meeting his gaze with the steady confidence of someone accustomed to being challenged and emerging victorious. Her expression remains neutral despite the obvious implications of his inquiry, though something flickers behind her eyes. Not anger, but a weary recognition of familiar territory. "Yes, sir. This is my assigned seat," she responds quietly, her voice carrying the calm professionalism that has served her well in countless interrogations and courtroom testimonies. She reaches into her leather purse with deliberate movements and produces her boarding pass, the paper slightly crumpled from being checked multiple times at various security checkpoints. She extends it toward the captain with a steady hand, her movements precise and controlled. 2A, as you can see. Richardson examines the boarding pass with exaggerated scrutiny, holding it up to the overhead reading light as if searching for watermarks or other signs of forgery. His performance is theatrical and deliberate, designed to humiliate rather than verify. This seems legitimate, he admits grudgingly after a long pause, his tone suggesting that legitimacy itself is somehow suspicious when associated with her presence in first class. "But company policy requires that I verify the identity of passengers in premium seating. I'll need to see some identification. The request itself isn't unusual. Flight crews do have the authority to verify passenger identity, but Richardson's tone transforms it into something more sinister, a challenge designed to establish dominance rather than ensure security. Around them, passengers begin to shift uncomfortably in their seats, their conversations dying as they tune into the developing confrontation. The atmosphere in the cabin grows tense, charged with the electricity that precedes a storm. Sarah reaches back into her purse and withdraws her Illinois driver's license, the same identification that has passed through countless federal security checkpoints without question, that has gotten her into FBI headquarters every morning for 5 years, that has never once been questioned as anything other than authentic. The plastic card bears her photograph, her signature, and the official seals of the state of Illinois, all clearly visible under the cabin lighting. She hands it to Richardson with the same calm demeanor, though passengers around them begin to pull out their phones, some sensing that they might be witnessing something worth documenting. Richardson takes the license with a show of reluctance, as if handling something distasteful. He holds it up for an unnecessarily long examination, turning it over multiple times and running his thick fingers along its edges with exaggerated suspicion. He holds it up to the overhead lights from different angles, squints at the photograph, and even appears to smell the plastic, a performance so over the top that several passengers exchange uncomfortable glances. "You know," Richardson says, with a sneer that reveals yellowed teeth, his voice loud enough to carry throughout the first-class cabin, "I've been flying for over 20 years, and I've seen plenty of fake identification in my time. The quality of forgeries these days is quite sophisticated." His words are carefully chosen to plant seeds of doubt, to suggest criminality without making direct accusations that could expose him to legal liability. The implication hits the cabin like a physical blow, sucking the air out of conversations and causing heads to turn throughout the premium section. Sarah's composure doesn't crack, but something flickers in her dark eyes. Not anger, but a profound sadness at the familiar weight of prejudice, the exhausting reality of having to prove her right to exist in spaces that others occupy without question. "Sir, that identification is genuine," she states simply, her voice remaining level despite the growing whispers from other passengers and the feeling that every eye in the cabin is now focused on their interaction. "I don't think it is," Richardson declares with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. His decision appears to have been made long before he examined her identification, and now he's simply following through on predetermined prejudice. In one swift motion, he tears the driver's license in half with a sharp snap that echoes through the suddenly silent cabin. But he doesn't stop there. Richardson tears the halves into quarters, then eighths, his movements becoming more aggressive with each destruction. The plastic card yields with sharp, snapping sounds that punctuate the silence like gunshots, each tear representing not just the destruction of a document, but an assault on Sarah's dignity, her right to travel, her very identity as a law-abiding citizen. Pieces of Sarah's identification rain down onto the airplane carpet like confetti at a celebration of cruelty. Scattered fragments of her name, her photograph, her signature mixing with the industrial-grade carpet fibers. The sound of plastic hitting the floor seems unnaturally loud in the stunned silence that follows Richardson's action. Sarah stares at the scattered fragments for a long moment, her hands still folded in her lap, with the self-control that has been drilled into her through years of FBI training and a lifetime of navigating discrimination. Around her, passengers begin pulling out their phones in earnest now, some recording video while others type furiously on social media platforms, sharing real-time updates about what they're witnessing. The flight attendants hover uncertainly in the galley area, their extensive training offering no guidance for this unprecedented situation that falls outside every protocol they've memorized. "Ma'am, you'll need to gather your belongings and move to an economy seat," Richardson commands, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who believes he's won a decisive victory over an opponent who never should have been allowed to challenge him in the first place. "Since you can't provide valid identification, I'm questioning whether you even have a right to be on this aircraft, let alone in first class." But Sarah doesn't move. Instead, she begins collecting the pieces of her destroyed license with methodical precision, her movements deliberate and dignified as she refuses to be hurried by Richardson's demands or the stares of fellow passengers. Each fragment is placed carefully in her palm, her actions serving as a quiet rebuke to the chaos Richardson has attempted to create around her. "I'm going to need you to move to the back of the aircraft immediately," Richardson announces, his voice carrying across the cabin with theatrical authority that draws attention from passengers in the economy section, who crane their necks to see what's happening in first class. "And I want to examine that briefcase and whatever you claim are legal documents. For all I know, you could be carrying blueprints, surveillance equipment, or worse." Several passengers have their phones out now, recording what they believe to be an incident of blatant discrimination disguised as security theater. The captain either doesn't notice the growing digital audience or doesn't care about the potential consequences of being recorded. His focus remains entirely on Sarah, as if her very presence in first class represents a personal affront that must be corrected through whatever means necessary. Sarah maintains her position in the aisle, still holding the fragments of her identification like pieces of evidence in a case she's building in her mind. "Captain Richardson," she says quietly, reading his name tag with the careful attention to detail that has made her an effective investigator. "Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this course of action? Are you sure you want to examine federal documents without proper authorization?" "Federal documents?" Richardson scoffs, but there's a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Lady, you could tell me those are nuclear launch codes and I wouldn't believe you. You've been acting suspiciously since takeoff, and now you're trying to intimidate me with claims about federal documents." "I'm not trying to intimidate anyone," Sarah responds calmly. "I'm simply informing you that the documents in my briefcase are classified materials related to congressional testimony on cybersecurity legislation. Examining them without proper clearance would constitute a federal crime." Richardson's face flushes red with anger at being challenged. "Are you threatening me? Are you actually trying to threaten a commercial airline captain with federal prosecution?" "Lady, I'm the authority on this aircraft, and what I say goes." He takes a step closer, using his physical presence and the authority of his uniform to intimidate, his bulk casting a shadow over Sarah's smaller frame. His proximity is clearly intended to be threatening, a classic power play designed to make her feel small and vulnerable. "What I'm saying," Richardson continues, his voice growing louder and more aggressive, "is that you need to open that briefcase right now, or I'm declaring an in-flight emergency and having you arrested for suspicious behavior and possible terrorism-related activities." "Captain Richardson," she continues, her voice carrying a new quality, still quiet, but with an underlying steel that wasn't there before, like a blade being slowly unsheathed. "I want to make sure you understand the gravity of what you've just done. You've destroyed legal identification belonging to a federal employee and are now demanding to examine classified government documents without authorization. Don't try to lecture me about regulations." Richardson snaps, his face flushing red with anger at being challenged. "I know airline security better than you ever will, and I know suspicious surveillance behavior when I see it. You've been studying this aircraft like you're planning some kind of operation, and everyone on this plane knows it." The flight attendant supervisor, Jennifer Chen, finally approaches the confrontation after watching from the galley with growing alarm. Her 20 years of experience have taught her to recognize when situations are spiraling beyond normal passenger service issues, and the tension radiating from this confrontation sets off every professional alarm bell she possesses. Her face shows the strain of someone caught between protocol and conscience, between supporting her captain and protecting a passenger who appears to be the victim of discriminatory treatment. "Captain, perhaps we should handle this more quietly," Jennifer suggests in a low voice, glancing nervously at the recording passengers and the way the incident is drawing attention from throughout the aircraft. "Maybe we could discuss this in the galley, away from the other passengers?" "There's nothing quiet about potential terrorism surveillance, Jennifer," Richardson responds dismissively, his voice loud enough to ensure that everyone nearby can hear his accusations. "This woman has been conducting what appears to be intelligence-gathering operations on our aircraft, and I won't tolerate it. I'm exercising my authority as captain to ensure the safety and security of legitimate passengers." His use of the word legitimate hangs in the air like an indictment, clearly implying that Sarah's legitimacy as a passenger is in question based on nothing more than his assumptions about who belongs in first class and who might be planning terrorist activities. Sarah's expression shifts almost imperceptibly, a change so subtle that only someone trained in reading human behavior would notice it. The word terrorism seems to trigger something deeper than personal offense, a professional recognition of irony that only she can fully appreciate in this moment. She looks down at the destroyed pieces of her identification scattered across the carpet, then back up at Richardson with eyes that seem to carry hidden knowledge. "Captain Richardson," Sarah says, her voice taking on a different quality entirely. Still quiet, but with an authority that seems to emanate from somewhere deep within her. "I need you to understand something very important. What you've just done, destroying federal identification and demanding to examine classified documents, those are federal crimes under multiple sections of United States Code. Richardson scoffs, but there's a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes at her precise legal knowledge. Federal identification. It's a driver's license from Illinois, and those aren't classified documents. They're probably fake legal papers you picked up online to support whatever operation you're running. He turns toward the other passengers as if seeking validation for his actions, his gesture clearly designed to rally support from what he assumes is a sympathetic audience. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly the kind of behavior that makes air travel dangerous. People who conduct surveillance operations on aircraft and then try to intimidate crew members with claims about federal documents and government authority. But the faces looking back at him don't show the support he expects. Instead, he sees expressions of discomfort, disapproval, and in some cases, open hostility. The passengers aren't rallying to his accusations of surveillance and terrorism. They're documenting his behavior for posterity, and their expressions suggest they've already reached their own conclusions about who's really the threat to passenger safety. Sarah isn't finished. She reaches into her blazer pocket with deliberate slowness and withdraws a small leather folder, holding it closed in her palm like a secret waiting to be revealed. Captain, I'm going to give you one final opportunity to reconsider your actions. Are you absolutely certain you want to continue down this path of accusing federal employees of terrorism? What is that supposed to be? Richardson demands, his voice carrying a note of nervousness that wasn't there before. Something about Sarah's calm confidence and specific legal knowledge is beginning to penetrate his wall of certainty. Some kind of fake federal badge you bought online, another prop to support your surveillance operation. The tension in the cabin reaches a breaking point, the air itself seeming to vibrate with anticipation. Passengers lean forward in their seats, sensing that something significant is about to unfold, that they're witnessing a moment that will be remembered and discussed long after the flight lands. The aircraft continues its steady progress toward Washington, but inside the cabin, time seems suspended in anticipation of whatever revelation Sarah is about to provide. You know what your problem is? Richardson continues, his voice growing louder and more aggressive as he misinterprets the tension for validation of his position. You people think you can conduct surveillance operations on commercial aircraft and then intimidate crew members when you get caught. You think you can wave around fake federal documents and claim government authority. Well, not on my aircraft, not while I'm in command. The phrase, "you people," hits the cabin like a slap, stripping away any pretense that this confrontation is about security concerns or suspicious behavior. Around him, passengers exchange uncomfortable glances at Richardson's increasingly explicit language, the mask of professional authority slipping to reveal the ugly prejudice underneath. Sarah's grip tightens on the leather folder, her knuckles showing white against her dark skin. Captain. Jennifer, the flight attendant, tries again, her voice carrying a note of desperation. Maybe we should contact the Federal Air Marshal Service before this situation escalates any further. Before what? Richardson cuts her off sharply, his authority extending to his own crew members. Before we let suspected terrorists intimidate trained aviation professionals, before we let people like her think they can run surveillance operations with impunity, I don't think so. He turns back to Sarah with renewed aggression, his confidence bolstered by what he perceives as successful intimidation of his flight attendant. Ma'am, I'm giving you exactly 30 seconds to open that briefcase, show me whatever fake documents you're carrying, and explain exactly what kind of surveillance operation you're conducting, or I'm declaring an in-flight security emergency, and having you arrested by federal agents for suspected terrorism-related activities." Sarah nods slowly, as if accepting his ultimatum and acknowledging the finality of his position. But instead of reaching for her briefcase or moving towards the economy section, her fingers begin working at the clasp of the leather folder in her hand. The small metallic sound it makes when opening seems to echo throughout the cabin with unusual clarity, cutting through the engine noise and the whispered conversations of fascinated passengers. 30 seconds starts now," Richardson declares, checking his watch with dramatic emphasis, his gesture designed to add theatrical weight to his ultimatum. But as he looks back up, expecting to see Sarah opening her briefcase or gathering her belongings in defeat, his expression begins to change. Sarah has opened the folder, and something inside it is reflecting the cabin lights in a way that demands immediate attention, something that glints with an authority that makes his captain's stripes seem suddenly insignificant. The FBI badge catches the overhead lights and throws them back in sharp, golden rays that seem to illuminate the entire first-class cabin like a beacon of truth, cutting through Richardson's manufactured darkness. Special Agent Sarah Williams holds her credentials steady at eye level, allowing Captain Richardson and everyone else aboard Flight 747 to absorb the full implications of what they're seeing. Not just a badge, but a complete upheaval of everything they thought they understood about power, authority, and who holds the real cards in this confrontation. The silence that follows is absolute and profound. Not the quiet of a sleeping aircraft or the hush of passengers absorbed in entertainment, but the stunned silence of a world suddenly turned upside down, of assumptions shattered so completely that words become inadequate. Richardson's face goes through a rapid series of transformations, confusion giving way to disbelief, disbelief crashing into recognition, and recognition dissolving into the pale horror of someone who realizes they've just made a catastrophic, career-ending mistake. Special Agent Sarah Williams, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Cybercrime Division, Sarah announces in a voice that has shed all traces of the quiet passenger she appeared to be moments before. Her credentials remain open and steady, the official seal of the FBI clearly visible to passengers who crane their necks and lean into the aisles to see. The gold badge gleams under the cabin lights like a small sun, its authority undeniable and absolute. "Badge number 77492. She continues, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to identifying herself to suspects, witnesses, and federal judges. "Captain Richardson, you've just destroyed federal identification belonging to a federal law enforcement officer who was traveling on official government business." Richardson stumbles backward as if physically struck, his aviator sunglasses sliding down his nose to reveal eyes wide with shock and growing panic. The transformation is remarkable. Seconds ago, he was the unquestioned authority figure, the man in control, the one making demands and issuing ultimatums. Now he looks like a child caught in a lie so enormous that there's no possibility of talking his way out of it. That's impossible!" he stammers, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "You can't be. I mean, you don't look like—" The words trail off as he realizes how they sound, how they expose the fundamental prejudice that drove his actions. "Like what, Captain?" Sarah's question cuts through his stammering with surgical precision, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "What exactly should an FBI agent look like? Please, enlighten all of us about your expertise in federal law enforcement personnel identification." She takes a step forward, and Richardson instinctively retreats, bumping into the armrest of seat 1C. The power dynamic that defined their interaction seconds ago has reversed so completely that passengers audibly gasp, some covering their mouths in amazement at the dramatic turn of events. Jennifer, the flight attendant, covers her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide as she recognizes the magnitude of the situation unfolding before her. This isn't just a customer service issue or even a discrimination complaint. This is a federal incident that will involve multiple agencies and could destroy careers. Other crew members emerge from the galley like moths drawn to a flame, their faces showing mixtures of fascination and horror as they realize they're witnessing their captain's professional suicide. The passengers with phones have shifted from recording what they thought was discrimination to documenting what they now realize is a federal incident of unprecedented proportions. The mood in the cabin has changed completely. Where before there was discomfort and outrage, now there's electric anticipation and barely contained excitement as everyone realizes they're about to witness justice being served in real time. "Agent Williams!" Richardson begins, his voice cracking with desperation. "I had no way of knowing—" "You had no way of knowing because you didn't bother to verify before you acted." Sarah interrupts, her voice carrying the authority of someone who has interrogated hardened criminals and emerged victorious. "You made assumptions based solely on my appearance, destroyed my federal identification without cause, and accused me of multiple federal crimes, all while I was traveling to Washington to testify before the House Subcommittee on Cybersecurity about legislation that will protect American financial institutions from international criminal organizations." She reaches into her briefcase and withdraws a thick manila folder marked with official seals and classification stamps, its contents spilling slightly as she opens it to reveal documents bearing the letterheads of Congress, the Department of Justice, and the FBI. But here's what's truly interesting, Captain Richardson. For the past 8 months, I've been conducting a comprehensive investigation into discrimination complaints filed against major airlines operating out of Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Richardson's face drains of all color as the implications hit him like a freight train. Around the cabin, passengers exchange glances of amazement and growing excitement as they realize they're not just witnessing justice, but calculated professional justice delivered by someone who has been building a case all along. "Would you be surprised to learn," Sarah continues, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone presenting evidence in a federal courtroom, "that your name appears in 17 separate incident reports filed with the Department of Transportation's Office of Aviation Enforcement and Proceedings over the past 6 months? 17 different passengers of color who claim they were subjected to unusual scrutiny, harassment, and, in 3 documented cases, removal from flights despite possessing valid documentation and tickets. 17 complaints." She repeats, allowing the number to sink in. All involving passengers who share one common characteristic, their race. All involving the same airline employee, you, Captain Richardson. All following remarkably similar patterns of behavior that we've just witnessed firsthand. Richardson's mouth opens and closes silently, like a fish gasping for air. He looks around the cabin desperately, seeking some form of support or escape, but finds only the recording devices of passengers and the horrified expressions of his own crew members, who are already calculating the distance they need to put between themselves and his sinking career. "But wait," Sarah says, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone that somehow makes her words even more devastating. "There's more. In your 23-year career with this airline, How many passengers have you personally removed from first-class seats for what you claimed were documentation issues? She doesn't wait for an answer, instead consulting a document from her folder. According to your airline's own internal records, which I've reviewed as part of my federal investigation under the authority granted by the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the answer is 31 passengers over the course of your career. The cabin is so quiet that the aircraft's engines seem unnaturally loud. Would you like to guess the racial breakdown of those 31 passengers, Captain? Or should I save us all some time and tell you that 29 of them were people of color, despite the fact that passengers of color represent only 18% of first-class travelers on your routes? The statistics hang in the air like an indictment, mathematical proof of systematic discrimination that even Richardson can't deny or explain away. His career, his reputation, his future, all of it crumbling under the weight of his own documented prejudice. Sarah pulls out her phone and begins dialing, her movements calm and professional. This is Special Agent Williams, badge number 77492, FBI Cybercrime Division. I need immediate coordination with Washington Dulles Airport Security, the Federal Air Marshal Service, and the Department of Transportation's Office of Aviation Enforcement and Proceedings. I have a federal incident aboard United Airlines Flight 747 involving destruction of federal identification, civil rights violations, and interference with a federal agent traveling on official business. The conversation that follows is brief but devastating in its implications. Sarah provides flight details, Richardson's full name and employee identification number, which she reads directly from his uniform, and a preliminary report that will trigger investigations by multiple federal agencies. Richardson can only stand frozen as his world collapses around him, each word Sarah speaks sealing his fate more completely. "Captain," Sarah says as she ends the call, her voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "I want you to understand something very clearly. What happened here today wasn't a misunderstanding or an overzealous application of security protocols. This was a federal law enforcement officer being subjected to racial discrimination while traveling on official government business to testify before Congress. The Federal Bureau of Investigation takes such incidents very seriously, as do the Department of Justice, the Department of Transportation, and, I suspect, your airline's board of directors." Richardson attempts one final desperate explanation, his voice barely above a whisper. "Agent Williams, I swear on my mother's grave that I didn't know who you were. If you had just identified yourself from the beginning—" "Identified myself?" Sarah's voice carries a note of incredulity that cuts through Richardson's pleading like a knife. "Captain, I provided valid, government-issued identification which you examined thoroughly before destroying it. Are you seriously suggesting that black passengers should be required to prove they're federal agents to receive basic dignity and respect on commercial aircraft?" The question exposes the fundamental flaw in Richardson's thinking so clearly that several passengers actually laugh, not with humor, but with the bitter recognition of prejudice laid completely bare. Richardson's mouth opens and closes silently, his authority completely evaporated, his excuses exposed as the hollow justifications of a man who never expected to face consequences for his actions. The announcement that comes over the aircraft's intercom system sounds routine to passengers unfamiliar with aviation protocols, but Richardson recognizes it immediately as the death knell of his career. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your co-pilot speaking. We will be making an unscheduled priority approach to Washington Dulles International Airport to accommodate federal authorities who need to board our aircraft immediately upon landing. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We expect to be on the ground in approximately 12 minutes. Richardson's hands shake uncontrollably as he realizes the full scope of what's unfolding around him. This isn't just an embarrassing incident that will blow over after a formal apology and some diversity training. This is a federal case that will involve the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Department of Transportation, congressional oversight committees, and almost certainly the national media. His 23-year career, his pilot's license, his pension, his reputation, all of it disappearing faster than the landscape rushing past the aircraft windows. He looks toward the cockpit, where his co-pilot is undoubtedly fielding urgent questions from air traffic control about the nature of their emergency, probably wondering what his captain has done to warrant federal intervention. The realization that his own crew will distance themselves from him hits Richardson like another blow, adding professional isolation to his growing list of consequences. "Agent Williams," Richardson begins desperately, his voice breaking like a teenager asking for forgiveness. "Surely we can resolve this situation without involving federal prosecutors and congressional oversight committees. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but surely we can work something out between reasonable people." "Captain Richardson," Sarah interrupts with the calm authority of someone who has taken complete control of the situation. "You've already involved multiple federal agencies by destroying a federal agent's identification and subjecting her to discrimination based on race while she was traveling on official government business. The resolution of this situation is no longer in your hands. It never was, from the moment you decided to tear up my identification." Passengers throughout the cabin watch the exchange with fascination that borders on entertainment. What began as an uncomfortable incident of apparent discrimination has transformed into a masterclass in how power can shift when assumptions prove catastrophically wrong. Many are still recording, ensuring that Richardson's downfall will be preserved in digital format and shared across social media platforms within hours of landing. The viral nature of what's about to happen seems to dawn on Richardson slowly, adding another layer of horror to his already pale expression. In the age of smartphones and social media, his humiliation won't be confined to the passengers on this flight. It will be witnessed by millions of people around the world, becoming a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked prejudice. Jennifer, the flight attendant, approaches cautiously, her professional training warring with her desire to distance herself from the unfolding catastrophe. "Agent Williams, is there anything the crew can do to assist with the federal investigation?" Her question represents a complete abandonment of Richardson's authority. The crew is now taking direction from Sarah rather than their captain, a shift that doesn't go unnoticed by anyone in the cabin. "Please ensure that all passengers remain seated during our approach and landing," Sarah responds with professional efficiency. Federal agents will need to board immediately upon arrival to secure the scene and collect evidence. This aircraft is now part of an active federal investigation involving civil rights violations and interference with federal law enforcement operations. The weight of her words settles over the cabin like a blanket of anticipation. Passengers exchange excited whispers about being witnesses to a federal case, about the videos they've recorded, about the historic nature of what they're experiencing. Some are already posting updates to social media, their posts beginning with phrases like, "You won't believe what just happened on my flight," and "Karma is real, and I just watched it happen in person." Richardson slumps into an empty first-class seat, his face buried in his hands as the magnitude of his situation becomes clear. His pilot's license gone, his career destroyed, his reputation ruined, his pension probably forfeit. All because of a decision that took less than 60 seconds to make, but will define the rest of his life. "Captain," Sarah continues, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone delivering a closing argument. "I want you to understand exactly what you've accomplished today. You've committed multiple federal crimes by destroying the identification of a federal law enforcement officer. You've violated the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by subjecting a passenger to discrimination based on race. You've interfered with a federal agent traveling on official business. You've created a hostile environment for passengers based on racial prejudice. And you've done all of this while being recorded by multiple witnesses whose testimony will be available to federal prosecutors." As if summoned by her words, passengers throughout the cabin hold up their phones, their screens showing the recording indicators that have been capturing Richardson's humiliation for posterity. The evidence against him isn't just overwhelming, it's documented in high definition from multiple angles, ensuring that there will be no possibility of denial or alternative explanations. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah adds, her voice carrying a note of finality that seems to echo through the cabin, "You've demonstrated exactly why the investigation I've been conducting was necessary. Your behavior today will serve as evidence in congressional hearings about discrimination in the airline industry, in Department of Transportation policy revisions, and in civil rights legislation that will bear the names of passengers like the 17 people who filed complaints about your previous behavior." The aircraft begins its descent toward Dulles, and through the windows, passengers can see the airport growing larger below them. The sight should be routine, but today it carries the weight of impending justice. Richardson knows that waiting on the ground are federal agents who will arrest him, investigators who will question him, prosecutors who will charge him, and probably reporters who will document his perp walk for the evening news. "Agent Williams," Richardson says quietly, his voice barely audible above the aircraft's engines and the excited whispers of passengers. "I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. What I did was wrong, and I know that now. I let my prejudices control my actions, and I've hurt you and embarrassed myself and my airline." Sarah studies his face for a long moment, perhaps searching for genuine remorse rather than the self-preservation that typically drives such apologies. When she speaks, her voice carries a note of sadness rather than triumph. "Captain Richardson, your apology doesn't undo the humiliation you intended to inflict on me. It doesn't repair the damage to my federal identification, and it doesn't erase the pain you caused to 17 other passengers who filed complaints about your behavior. Most importantly, it doesn't change the fact that you only feel sorry now that you've learned there will be consequences for your actions." The truth of her statement hangs in the air as the aircraft touches down at Dulles International Airport with a gentle bump that marks the end of Richardson's career as surely as it marks the end of the flight. Through the windows, passengers can see federal vehicles with flashing lights positioned near their gate, a sight that sends ripples of excitement through the cabin. Richardson's 23-year career is ending exactly where Sarah's investigation is reaching its climax, with accountability finally catching up to unchecked prejudice, with justice served not through violence or revenge, but through the careful application of federal law by a professional who refused to be intimidated into silence. 3 months after Flight 747, Sarah Williams sits in a television studio in downtown Washington, adjusting her microphone for what has become her 23rd interview about the incident that changed everything. The original video recorded by passengers has been viewed more than 85 million times across all social media platforms, but more importantly, it has sparked a national conversation about discrimination in air travel that has led to concrete legislative and policy changes. "Agent Williams," the CNN interviewer begins, her voice carrying the respectful tone reserved for guests who have become symbols of something larger than themselves. "Your response during that flight has been described as remarkably composed, almost preternaturally calm. "How did you maintain such control under those circumstances?" Sarah smiles, her hand unconsciously touching the small silver frame on the interview table that contains a photograph of her father in his army dress uniform, taken the day he received his Silver Star for valor in Afghanistan. "My father taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain silent until you have the perfect moment to speak. He used to say that dignity is something no one can take from you. You can only give it away. That day on the airplane, I chose not to give it away." The interviewer nods thoughtfully, her expression reflecting the gravity of what has unfolded since that October afternoon. "And yet your silence during that incident, followed by your revelation, ultimately led to what many are calling the most significant civil rights victory in aviation history. Can you tell us about the broader impact?" The morning after the video went viral, we received over 400 new discrimination complaints from passengers across all major airlines. Sarah explains, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who has testified before Congress multiple times in the past 3 months. "What happened to me wasn't unique. It was just the first time such an incident was documented so thoroughly and involved a federal agent who could take immediate legal action. The segment includes footage from congressional hearings where airline executives faced harsh questioning about their training protocols, hiring practices, and discrimination policies. Sarah's testimony, delivered with the same calm authority she displayed on the aircraft, proved instrumental in passing the Aviation Civil Rights Act, which requires comprehensive anti-bias training for all airline personnel and establishes federal oversight of discrimination complaints. Captain Richardson ultimately received a federal conviction for civil rights violations and destruction of federal property. The interviewer notes, he lost his pilot's license permanently and was sentenced to 6 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of community service. Do you ever think about him? Sarah pauses thoughtfully, her expression showing the complexity of someone who has become a symbol of justice while remaining fundamentally human. I think about Marcus Richardson often, but not in the way people might expect. I think about the 17 passengers who filed complaints about his behavior before our encounter. I think about how many others never filed complaints at all, who simply accepted discrimination as the price of air travel. Captain Richardson was a symptom of a larger systemic problem, and solving systemic problems requires more than punishing individuals. It requires changing the systems that enable such behavior. The interview shifts to discuss the Sarah Williams Foundation, established with donations that poured in from around the world after the incident. The foundation has raised over $12 million and provides legal assistance to passengers who experience discrimination, funding that has already helped secure settlements totaling more than $30 million for victims across the transportation industry. The most meaningful part, Sarah explains, her voice carrying the passion of someone who has found her true calling, isn't the money we've recovered for passengers or even the policy changes we've achieved. It's the systematic transformation we've seen across the entire industry. Airlines have completely revised their training programs, implemented new oversight protocols, established independent review boards for discrimination complaints, and most importantly, created safe reporting channels for both passengers and employees who witness discrimination. In the 3 months since the incident, Captain Marcus Richardson has become a cautionary tale, studied in business schools, law schools, and aviation management programs as an example of how quickly unchecked prejudice can destroy a career and expose organizations to massive legal liability. His case is now required reading in civil rights law courses and diversity training programs across multiple industries. But Sarah's story has become something larger and more inspiring, a testament to the power of maintaining dignity under pressure. the importance of speaking truth to power when the moment is right, and the way individual acts of courage can catalyze systemic change. The torn identification card, carefully reconstructed and now displayed in a frame in her FBI office, serves as a daily reminder that sometimes the most devastating defeats can become the most meaningful victories when handled with wisdom and strategic patience. The story of Special Agent Sarah Williams reminds us that power doesn't always wear the uniform we expect, that authority doesn't always announce itself with gold stripes and aviator sunglasses. Sometimes real power sits quietly in seat 2A, collecting the pieces of a torn identification card while calculating the perfect moment to reveal the truth that will change everything. But here's the question that should keep us all awake at night, the question that should make us look around airplane cabins and coffee shops and boardrooms with new eyes. How many Sarah Williams are sitting around us right now, their true identities hidden beneath the assumptions and prejudices of people who think they know who belongs where, based on nothing more than the color of their skin? How many times have we witnessed discrimination and chosen the comfortable silence of bystanders over the courageous action of allies? How many Captain Richardsons have we enabled through our passivity, our unwillingness to speak up, our assumption that someone else will handle the uncomfortable confrontations that define our moral character? The next time you see someone being treated unfairly because of their race, their gender, their age, their religion, or any other characteristic that shouldn't determine their worth as a human being, remember Captain Richardson's face when that FBI badge emerged from Sarah's blazer like a golden sword of justice. Remember how 23 years of unchecked authority crumbled in the face of actual power wielded with purpose, precision, and perfect timing. If this story stirred something deep in your chest, if it made you angry about injustice or hopeful about accountability, if it reminded you that karma sometimes wears a badge and speaks with quiet authority, then don't let that feeling fade. Share this story. Let it remind others that in a world where anyone might be recording, where social media can transform local incidents into global movements, and where federal agents sometimes travel in coach class, prejudice has become a high-risk, low-reward behavior. The most beautiful part of Sarah's story isn't that she happened to be an FBI agent who could fight back with federal authority. It's that she chose to fight back not just for herself, but for every passenger who came before her and every passenger who will come after. She transformed personal humiliation into systemic change, individual dignity into collective progress, one man's prejudice into a nation's awakening. So the next time you board an aircraft, look around the cabin and remember, you never know who's sitting next to you. You never know whose story you might become part of. And you definitely never know who might be quietly carrying a badge, a law degree, a congressional connection, or simply the moral courage that will change everything when the moment demands it.